Welcome to Propaganda Loves You, the show that asks and answers the question, what do we mean by propaganda anyway? I'm Kodie Olbert, one of your hosts for today, and I'll be joined by Arthur and Joe.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
So I've got a bunch of things that could either be conspiracies or they could have really happened. And so I'm going to tell you what it is, and you guys have to tell me if it's real and actually happened or if it's just a conspiracy.
I mean, some
Sound
cases
good?
happen, so it's like, I don't know.
True. Starts
That's-
as a conspiracy.
That is always the argument. I get told a lot in life that I'm a conspiracy theorist. And while it may be true, I think that a lot of the conspiracies, yes, they have happened.
Yeah, it's like just conspiring together. Like people conspire, it happens.
Okay, so that's fair. So I guess did this happen or not
Okay.
is really what we're saying. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So there's three of them. I'll start up top. Okay. The U.S. Air Force considered detonating a nuclear bomb on the moon to display military superiority. That's one thing. Number two is the Soviet Union attempted to build a doomsday device capable of destroying all life on Earth if they were attacked. And then number three is the U.S. Army initiated a program to develop psychic spies capable of remote viewing and influencing enemy assets.
We're thinking the same thing. I
Yeah.
think they all.
I'm tapped into a few of these conspiracy theory things, and like that last one, that's the Gateway Project right there.
Yeah.
And it
Oh,
And
is.
men who stare at
yeah.
goats or something. Wasn't that
Yeah,
based on
the
that?
movie. Yeah. I thought the second one
like-
maybe sounded kind of fake, just because I don't know. Self-annihilation is a big deal. I think most nation states and institutions are going to try to preserve themselves at all costs. So I can't imagine like a suicide button for a big empire. So that's my guess on the fake one.
Okay, so you think that one's if one's fake, that's the one. Okay.
Yeah. Nuke on the moon.
Arthur, any
Nobody
thoughts?
really gets hurt.
We don't even need that thing. I think you're throwing a curveball, and I think they're all real.
All true.
Just like every conspiracy theory I've ever heard.
That is correct. They are all true.
Oh,
All these things occurred.
That's so scary.
So I'm just gonna read through these really quick and this is just from Wikipedia, but I mean it made me laugh while I was reading these. So the first one, the U.S. Air Force considered detonating a nuclear bomb on the moon to display military superiority. This is true. This was called Project A119, also known as a study of lunar research flights. That was a top secret plan developed in 1958 by the United States Air Force. The aim of the project was to detonate a nuclear bomb on the moon, which would then help in answering some of the mysteries in planetary astronomy and astrology. If the explosive device detonated on the surface and not in a lunar crater, the flash of explosive light would have been faintly visible to people on Earth with their naked eye. It was also meant to be a show of force, resulting in a possible boosting of domestic morale and the capabilities of the United States. And a boost was needed after the Soviet Union took the earlier lead in the space race. So yes, we at one point had plans to detonate a nuclear bomb on the moon.
That's so funny. I can just imagine like
Yeah.
50s style generals and everybody like seeing that the Soviets made it to the outer space. It's like, ideas, quick. What do you got? Let's nuke the moon.
Nuke the moon. Jesus. All right. So the next one, the Soviet Union attempted to build a doomsday device capable of destroying all life on Earth if they were attacked. Yeah, this is true. It was also known as the dead hand or perimeter. I think in Russian that's probably said a little bit differently, but basically it's a Cold War era automatic or semi-automatic nuclear weapons control system that was constructed by the Soviet Union. It supposedly remains in use to this day and can be activated, but basically it's like this thing where if certain conditions are met, like there's some seismic activity, radioactivity, and pressure sensors go off all at the same time, it would send a pre-entered highest authority order from the General Staff of the Armed Forces to launch their nuclear missiles and destroy Earth. So there's that. And then the last one, yeah, you guys got it right away. Stargate Project, secret U.S. Army unit established in 1978 at Fort Meade, Maryland, that was aimed at investigating the potential for psychic phenomenon for military and intelligence applications. The thing about this one that stuck out to me, two things. One, it didn't close until like 95, so they went almost 20 years with this psychic unit that was operating in the Army. And then, Joe, you already said it earlier. It was like the 1950s meeting for U.S. Air Force. Yeah, like I was born way too late to have a lot of really crazy shit when I worked for the government. Like, I feel like it could have been a lot more fun. But anyway, that's those there.
We all know that they just changed the program names. They're still working on the psychic abilities.
Yeah, the CIA, like, there's a guy, Robert Monroe, who figured out this meditation technique with frequencies and different frequencies in each earbud or whatever. And he has like a foundation. You can still do retreats there and learn that technique that the CIA learned. I read the paper that's on the CIA's website. Some Army general wrote a 20-page paper after going to one of those retreats and studying the technique and explained all the brain chemistry about how it's supposed to work and achieve astral body projection and remote viewing and stuff like that. And it's just so funny, like just a weird spiritual wacky read on the CIA website, like all the stuff they're studying.
So I think, Joe, you're going to kick us off for this one, yeah?
Yeah.
Or
Welcome. We're talking about propaganda. This is Propaganda Loves You. So today, what we're going to do to start off is just kind of talk about what we mean when we say the word propaganda. It gets thrown around a lot. It's sort of the central idea of this podcast. We have to sort of know what we all mean when we say that. So we're all going to have a slightly different take, but we're all getting at the same thing. I'm going to talk a little bit about how I look at propaganda and an example of that, and then so is Kodie and Arthur. Yeah. So to me, propaganda is a type of narrative, a type of story you tell, and the purpose of that story is to spread and support a particular point of view, a particular way of looking at the world. And so all of the messages within a system of propaganda are biased toward that point. And the propagandist, the person who does the propaganda, who writes the stories, they are fully aware of what their intention is. They're fully aware of the purpose of creating the stories and spreading them, but they don't always want their readers or listeners or viewers to be in on all of the story. Right? There's a sort of, in many cases, a sort of subversive element, a way they try to, they might not tell you all of their intentions, right? They'll try to tell you that buying this brand new car will really make you happy and will really improve your life a lot. They don't tell you that the dealer's going to mark it up 10 grand just to get their cut, and that they're doing it and using crappy parts and cheap labor to do it the cheapest way possible, because their point is to make money from you by selling you the shiny thing. So from their end, how do we sell this shiny new car to the people? We can't tell them, give me your money because we want your money. We have to convince them that this is something they need, something they want, something that will satisfy them and make them happy. If you've ever seen the show Mad Men on AMC, I think, the entire premise of this show is basically about how to be a good propagandist for the capitalist class, how to sell these products, how to tap into people's psychological issues and wants and needs and sort of tap these things that are within us to get us to give them their money. So it's a complicated story that the propagandist has to tell, and only some people are in on the whole thing. It's kind of the point. The main thing I want to point out about this and the sort of limitation to it, because it sounds really sinister when I explain it in this way, and in a lot of cases it is sinister, and in a lot of cases that's what we need to focus on. But there's also a case to be made that we have to all be good propagandists. We all have to do a sort of spreading of a message. Even on this show, I think we have a kind of worldview between the three of us where we want the world to be a better place. We believe that it can be. We want to explain to people how to do better and how to see through all this nonsense. And in that is a kind of propaganda, but we're trying to be transparent about it. But we do favor certain worldviews. We do favor ways of orienting to society that are better than others, perhaps kinder, more empathetic, if I dare say that word, less cruel, more collaborative, less competitive. These are just kind of some of my values I'm spitting out. But the limitation with any system of propaganda is that it puts one particular point of view on a pedestal. It's sort of the fancy word people use is reify, sort of like kings, like reign, like REIGN. When you reify something, you're sort of giving it this kingly status. So with propaganda, you're taking one way of looking, one worldview, and you're saying, this is it. This is what everyone has to look. Everyone needs to look at the world through a white Christian nationalist lens, for example, randomly, not connected to anything going on right now. But that's the main limitation of it. You can't see outside of it.
Joe, let me ask you a question earlier. You were mentioning how it's going after propaganda is going after like a specific worldview, and it's pushing a narrative. It came out in the way you were describing it, in that it's playing on emotion. Like that's what propaganda is really trying to pull out, an emotional response to something. Is that part
Yeah,
of it?
yeah, absolutely. That's part of it. Like any rhetorical appeal, when you're thinking about public speaking or even writing or anything that you want to persuade an audience to believe this or that, you're going to definitely try to appeal to emotions. That's like the low-hanging fruit in oratory or in like or for any propagandist, the emotional appeal is like the low-hanging fruit. How do you get people mad? How do you get people like really wanting something a lot, stowing up hatreds and desires is a really easy way to get people going in that way. Yeah, and the more subtle approaches would involve like some logical analysis or something, but who's got the attention span for something like that these days? But yeah, definitely the emotional appeal.
Please stay tuned for a word from our sponsors. For years, we've been told that democracy means debate, that every voice matters. But what if some voices are holding us back? What if progress is being stalled by those who refuse to accept reality? At New Policy Center, we believe that some ideas are too important to be left to public discourse. That's why we work directly with policymakers to ensure that most critical reforms are put in place before opposition can mobilize. Because the best policies aren't the ones argued over, they're the ones already in place.
So the example, I'm being kind of long-winded in the setup. The example I want to talk about quickly is the idea that the United States is a democracy. I've grown up believing this my whole life. Everyone's told to me. When I learned how the government works in grade school, the whole premise was that this is a democracy. This is an experiment in government, the great American experiment. And so I'm kind of wanting to challenge this idea as an example of propaganda, right? This idea of democracy, real quick, just some Greek etymology. Aristocracy and democracy are two words we get from the Greeks. What they have in common is that last part, prasi, right? And that just means rule or system of government, or like the way that a society is governed or ruled. It refers to the type of authority. And then the other part, aristocrat, aristocracy, it's the rule of the best born. It's sort of the rule of the noble class, the aristocracy. The democracy, the demos, that's sort of the people, the rule of the commons, the rule of the common people. So the idea of a democracy is that at the very least, it is a simple majority rule of the common people. That's sort of the main idea of a democracy. Okay. So if the United States is a democracy, if it's a government by and for the people, at least a simple majority would approve of the government. Okay. That's the notion I'm working with. Right now, there are, well, I should say around the time of the 2024 election, I'm just going to use these numbers. These numbers aren't very, proportion-wise, these numbers aren't going to be very different from any other election you can look at in history. Like presidents tend to get roughly the same amount of numbers when they win, so it's not like an anomaly, these numbers. But right now, the U.S. population is roughly 340 million people. Okay, let's assume only adults should vote. So let's subtract the kids. You subtract the under 18s from that number, you get about 266 million adults. Okay, 266 million. The Trump administration won 77 million votes, roughly. 77 million. You do that ratio, that's about 29% of adults supporting the administration that's in power. Okay. That's not even close to a simple majority approval. Okay. So if the idea is that it's that the people in charge of government, if it's a democracy, that means at least a simple majority approve of the people there, because that's how elections work. Then we are very, very, very far away from even being close to being able to call ourselves a democracy. So it makes sense why you have Bernie Sanders running around right now holding speeches talking about oligarchy, right? Because that's a very different kind of word that's a bit more precise in what we're dealing with. So the question is, why? Why would they do this? Why would they try to convince us that we have one system of government when, in fact, you look historically at any of the numbers in history, it's never been the case that a simple majority approves of the government in power. Presidents tend to get roughly 25-ish% of support when they win. So book we'll talk about on a future episode that I'll probably talk about a lot is this one, A People's History of the United States. And Howard Zinn talks about this precise issue when he's talking about the lead up to the American Revolution. The basic strategy is to sort of take systems of forms of resistance to power, which if you don't think about voting, what kind of resistance do you have to power? There's like violent protests, there's strikes, in the colonial time period, there's slave revolts. There are indigenous populations sort of fighting wars against colonial forces. There are all these different forms of resistance going on in the colonies before the establishment of the U.S. And so for the ruling class at that time, the question is, can we create a narrative that sort of funnels all these other forms of resistance, which are scary to us, into a more pacified, sort of gentle, organized system that it's easier for us to control and more predictable, less likely for things to get out of hand, right? I'm just going to read the first two paragraphs of chapter 4 of this book. The title of the chapter is called Tyranny is Tyranny. And Howard Zinn says this: around 1776, certain important people in the English colonies made a discovery that would prove enormously useful for the next 200 years. They found that by creating a nation, a symbol, a legal unity called the United States, they could take over land, profits, and political power from favorites of the British Empire. In the process, they could hold back a number of potential rebellions and create a consensus of popular support for the rule of a new privileged leadership. When we look at the American Revolution this way, it was a work of genius, and the Founding Fathers deserve the awed tribute they have received over the centuries. They created the most effective system of national control devised in modern times and showed future generations of leaders the advantages of combining paternalism with command. Paternalism, another word that refers to the family, the daddy. A paternity test is a daddy test, right? So the nation is the great daddy. You can't question it. We're all one big happy family, right? Just shut up, cast your votes, and deal with the results. So that's sort of the propaganda look at the idea of the U.S. being a democracy, where it comes from, what the purpose of that narrative is for the ruling class. And yeah, what do we think about that? This idea that this whole American democracy was set up at the outset in this way. How does that land with us?
Yeah, I can see it. You're kind of talking about how they discovered ways in which to make the sheeple, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we're all just pacified into consenting to the power.
Yeah. OG sheeple narrative. That's it. Exactly it.
You didn't say sheeple in the book, though?
No. It might be after his time. I don't know. Where's the first use of sheeple? What do you think? That's got to be podcast era, right? That era for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely. Joe's interesting. Like when you started that, I thought you were going to go a different direction, to be
No.
honest. You said something like democracy is essentially a rule of the common people.
Right.
Right. If you're doing a comparison to aristocracy. I thought you were going to talk about, well, are common people usually the ones running our government? Like anyway, like, or is it like people with money and power and influence, right? They already have that before they're getting into these places. You've got like, a few people obviously that make it into government that might not fall in that same path, but for the majority, like I thought that was kind of the direction that you were gonna go.
No, that's a good direction to go. I like that direction too, because it's like there are a bunch of different ways to try to do democracy, and there are a lot of experiments that have been done, especially on like a small township level. Like there are some New England townships, maybe you know some of them, that are like direct democracies, where you literally show up in the meeting house every month and vote on everything. And if like you're a citizen in that district, like that's a direct democracy. Everybody votes on everything. And maybe there's some sort of board or setup for people to organize a meeting and stuff. But basically, if you're a citizen, you get a vote on the legislation itself. You don't like put a representative up there. And there's also like a jury system kind of thing where like you just randomly get called to serve as your representative for the next 2 years, and you just pull random people in the same way you would for a jury. And like it's every citizen's implied duty to be ready for that at some point. I think that idea anyway is kind of interesting. I've never seen it actually put into use, but
Compared to our national system of we elect our representatives and then after that we get to vote every 2 years or something for new ones and the president.
yeah, but I mean, with the age of apps and like they have the technology to do a more closer to direct democracy style thing with us. Like we could vote on
Yeah.
things on our phone if they really wanted to make it happen.
I mean, and we already do that. Like for some, why is it that only some things go to a referendum
Oh,
or
yeah,
like
yeah.
public referendum?
Yeah.
We can do it for like marijuana and other things like that, but nothing more complicated, I guess. I don't I don't know. I'd have to look into that, see how that whole system works.
Yeah.
But
It's also like the impossibility when you think about the project of trying to really organize and control over 300 million people into the same, community that you're trying to build. Like that's
yeah.
that in and of itself creates a ton of inefficiency and impossible situations where it's like, what's actually the point of this whole narrative that we're one big happy family, all 340 million of us? What if we actually weren't one big thing and we did more of a like localized kind of thing?
Yeah.
I'm not necessarily calling for the erosion of the U.S. government. I'm just saying, like, let's have some thought experiments. That's all.
Yeah.
I mean, I think for me that's lovely to think about at the community level for sure. I think at the national level, it's like unfortunately we don't have control over what others are going to do if we're like, we're just going to turn every community in the United States to its own little thing. I mean, how long would it take before someone else decides that they're like, well, that land looks pretty decent, like
I like how you're pointing out how the inefficiencies kind of work for them. And my dream would be like in Oregon, we're fortunate enough to have mail-in voting. So I just vote weeks before. But what would be beautiful is an app. I vote, and then maybe I could check the app. It has a reference number, and it shows me that my vote was verified and counted correctly.
Yeah.
X is going to do that in
yeah.
2026, so it's okay.
You make a joke, but like I can see that coming out.
I mean,
He wants it to be everything.
Elon's figured it out, guys. Don't worry.
I'm probably gonna see like Teslas or Cybertrucks, if you're not already, with like Covey plates on them, just everywhere. Wouldn't be shocked. Well,
I think there was a $400 million order from the State Department for Teslas.
oh yeah,
armored
I remember
Teslas.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy. Okay, I've got one little discussion question, and then we can jump to where one of you guys want to go next. But okay, if we really dropped the democracy narrative and like stopped believing in it, like it's Santa Claus, right? We know you're not sliding down that chimney. It's nowhere close to 50%. We can't even really talk about a simple majority. What's really going on is an oligarchy, which means that they're never going to let us vote their money away. They're never going to let us vote away things that really matter in terms of power. So what forms of resistance are possible or reasonable if voting is not?
We're saying voting is not an acceptable method for change.
Well, voting's not going to change anything meaningful if you play with that idea. Okay, I can vote really hard every 2 years. I can really cast my ballot like I mean it.
Right.
But I can do that my whole life and watch nothing change. So outside of that, how does shit change?
Yeah, I think that the idea is that, you vote within the system and it's a bicameral system between two parties, and the parties have leadership, and that leadership kind of steers towards the center because the center makes the most sense for profit and captures the people. I think voting in that system probably is not going to result in a lot of change outside of that system. So I would look outside that system. So things like protesting
Yeah.
are great. You actually highlighted the example where the founding fathers had these rebellions and it actually forced the British Empire to recognize them. So power is something that can be taken back.
Joe, I could think about when you said like what are the things was the voting box and then the cartridge box, but I couldn't remember the other two.
Voting.
I had to Google it. Yeah. But it's it came from the 4 boxes of liberty is what it's from. So it's there's 4 pillars that you could be used in defense of liberty. It's the soap box, the ballot box, the jury box, and the cartridge box or like ammo, right? um, but I guess like that kind of aligns with what I was thinking anyway, which was just like, well, protest or speak out. That's kind of like the soapbox to try and get your message and narrative out there. Really don't think that, unfortunately, in the situation we're in, the jury box is a place where we're gonna get a clean or a fair shake. I don't know, just the justice system in general seems to be compromised.
Yeah. Ideally, within the system, if the system could work, we'd all have just leaders who do not engage with like PACs and we kind of get the political money out and
Yeah.
that would be the best result. But I think it might be too far
Yeah.
past the tipping
Yeah.
point.
No, I struggle with this a lot because this is shit we don't get taught. Like no one, like voting and working through the party system. That's how change happens in the country. That's what we're taught. That's how we're trained. They don't train us in other forms of resistance because why would they? Why would they teach us how to take their power away? But I think history is a good example because, you go back to what you were saying, Kodie, when the country was getting set up, what were the things they were scared of? They were scared of slave revolts. They were scared of indigenous groups attacking. They were scared of poor white people working together with freed slaves and forming coalitions, right? They were afraid of this sort of unity of oppressed, working class, enslaved, colonized groups that wanted change. And so solidarity is the big word, right? A lot of that can be done in union organizing at the workplace. I always thought when I started learning a little bit about unions, I always thought this idea of democracy made so much sense. It's like we put it up on a pedestal, the idea of democracy. We say, we want to spread democracy to the Middle East even. Like we're really aggressive about this democracy idea. So let's have it in the workplace. Why are we still working with some sort of feudal hierarchy in the workplace with a CEO who determines everything and people who just shut up and deal with it? Let's have some democracy in the workplace. Let's turn these Fortune 500s into co-ops and see what happens. Like, if you're really, really about democracy, let's see it everywhere. Let's actually do it. And other ideas too, like you were saying, the soapbox pillar in the 4 that you mentioned. You can do a lot with the soapbox. Including educating, which is part of what we're trying to do here. But also I would put like a financial soapbox subcategory. And by that, I mean boycotts. Even if you just look at like Tesla's numbers right now or Starbucks numbers since Hamas attacked Israel on October 7th and all of that stuff started and people have had reasons to protest against corporations aligned with Israel. So Starbucks' numbers have actually dropped a lot in the last almost 2 years because of that BDS campaign in and of itself. So boycott's a pretty effective way. Before we consider the cartridge option, there's always going to be, a Luigi in the back pocket somewhere. But like, there are other things we could do that aren't so violent, but are still disruptive. That I think the point is to hurt their bottom line in some way. Right? What is it they want from us? They want our attention. They want our money. So how can we sort of subvert that?
Yeah, I love that. And I love the call out to unions and labor. I think that there's like a lens of United States history which could be viewed where it's like it's all US, it's like US labor movement versus people with power and that clash. And I think that once you have that clash, that's when change can happen too, because it's those common people that are actually doing all the work, getting together, banding together in solidarity. That's awesome.
Yeah, that's Basically, Howard Zinn's lens through that whole history is like the broad working class, including everybody in the laboring class. Not just like now we say working class, it's like an epithet for poor white people. But like the working class is the most diverse class if you look at all the classes. It's everyone is in it. No matter what kind of person you think of, somebody's working class in that category. So, but yeah, the working class versus the ruling class, basically. That's the simplest way I like to think about it. But that's
Did it
my
ever,
biased point of view. That's my propaganda.
in your point of view, then, did it ever transform from an aristocrat kind of ruling into democracy then? Or is it still just aristocracy in some other form?
Yeah. I mean, on a national level, I'm not convinced
Yeah.
we've ever had a real democracy on a national level. I think it's always been kind of oligarchic. You could make the case for states and counties and cities and stuff like that. I have no idea what's going on there numerically, but I just feel like number-wise, you can't even get close to making the claim that a majority of the people living in the country have ever approved of the system of power in place.
So, couple thoughts. One thing I was thinking of, Joe, and maybe this just aligns to the soapbox and standing up and saying what you believe, but could actually be the model that Donald Trump actually used to take over the Republican Party. Like, they didn't want him to win in 2016. Like, he was not the establishment candidate in any way. Um, but he absolutely, did make it through that primary process and essentially turned the entire Republican Party to his image. Like, could you do the same thing to the Democratic Party, right? Is it possible to actually get rid of the people that don't have the majority of Americans' best interest in mind? Not in a not in a cartridge box way, but the point I'm trying to make with that is, like, when we say ballot box, I think what we normally think of is like going to vote, but it's also running for office, like putting people and like putting yourself out there, going and putting yourself in a position where you're like, I never want to be the comptroller of a town, but I'm going to run for it because I want to do a good job. And like the other people just want the power, right? Like, I think that's another aspect of that.
Totally, yeah. No, I've thought about that a lot, especially Democratic side. Like, I think especially this last election, it's clear that they don't listen to their base. They had a super strong candidate in 2016 and in 2020 that they could have ran with, and they did everything they could to kneecap that candidate both times. And if we want to save the voting system at all, if we want to really make it so that we can use the voting system to make life decent in this country, we need an alternative to the Democratic and Republican parties. We need a workers' party for real. That can't be, that primary process is even more of a democratic joke than the bigger democracy itself. Like, it's mostly a coronation.
Now it's turned into where just a few states actually pick the candidate because, whatever order they're doing their preliminary, oh my gosh, the word is just escaping me. But yeah,
The
that entire
primary, yeah.
process. Yeah, the primary is of, the order in which they select the states, and sometimes just Iowa picks.
Yeah.
Okay. It's kind of like how I view Congress, I guess. It's like in Senate, like senators, there's 2 senators for each state, but the population of California is like 60 million out of 340 million. They got 2 senators.
Yeah, I mean, the Senate
And
is
then you
an
get the electoral.
it's an aristocratic
Yeah.
body. Like, it just is. The House of Lords in the UK is the same thing as the Senate. They got the House of Lords and the House of Commons in the UK. We have the Senate and the House of Representatives. It's the same thing.
Yeah. Specifically put in place to temper the wild variations of the public,
Yep.
right? That they think the House would more likely represent. I actually thought that was another direction you were going to go when you were talking about, are we a democracy like that? Yeah, just the structure there, but also like, I don't know. Growing up, I thought that the Democratic Party and the Republican Party were like part of the government. Like, I thought like when I was little, like that's how pervasive that is, that these 2 parties are the only options, right? Like, and why is that? Well, it's actually private organizations that worked out deals with everyone that's holding the debates to only include certain amounts of people in the debate, right? Like, it's absolutely like cutting out an entire, like, anyone else that doesn't play in that system, right?
Yeah. I used to have it pulled up. I must have closed it. There's a video of like an overview of a Princeton study that was done, I think in 2018. But basically it was trying to see how much does or how much does popular opinion sway policy, right? If, say, 80% of people are in favor of single payer healthcare, what chance does that policy have of passing Congress? So they asked that question with a bunch of different things. And it turns out if there's a 100% popular support for a policy, 100% of people when surveyed are in support of it, there's about a 30% chance it'll get passed. If there is a 0% popular support for a policy, nobody wants it, there is also about a 30% chance it'll get passed. And that's true no matter where you go, except for the richest 1%. They get a bit more of a linear curve on their influence. If enough of them are really in favor of it, it'll definitely pass. If enough of them say, no, it must not pass, it definitely won't pass, right? But no matter what amount of support you get for a policy, about a 30% chance it'll pass.
That's ridiculous. That's insane. We should come up with some policies then, right? Like if it's a 30% chance, it doesn't matter what.
Taco Tuesday.
Yes, you're down.
Government-funded Taco Tuesday.
The widest,
Don't give them ideas.
the widest Mexican food you'll ever eat.
It's just going to be meat without even seasoning.
Yeah.
And like the wrong cheese. It won't even be like taco. It's going to be like, I don't know, mozzarella
It's like
or something. I don't know.
American cheddar, I think, actually.
Yeah.
Made in Michigan.
Please stay tuned for a word from our sponsors.
In today's fast-paced information environment, it's harder than ever to tell what's real.
Right. And even with trusted sources, facts can shift, narratives can change, and suddenly yesterday's truth is outdated.
That's where Truth AI comes in. It's a new platform using advanced artificial intelligence to continuously update historical records, political claims, and even scientific consensus.
And it doesn't just filter out misinformation, it rewrites the record in real time, syncing your understanding to the latest government-approved interpretation.
So users never have to wonder what to believe. They just know.
Because while history shouldn't change, it should be improved. Truth AI.
Truth AI.
Never doubt again.
Arthur?
Yeah, I'd preface my understanding of propaganda with, in school, what I studied mainly was political science and philosophy. So they have a really interesting intersection within propaganda, of course, because politics can definitely shape our world, and philosophy is kind of the thoughts that also have shaped our world, or the discourses and ideologies that have shaped our world. And I think of propaganda as a mechanism of power, kind of an invisible force, and it definitely shapes our reality through discourse, the ways in which we kind of talk about the world and understand it, and our ideologies, of course, the way that we understand the world. And propaganda, it has a nature of trying to replace truth with persuasion all around us. It's actually most effective, I think, when it is internalized, and that's done through a few effective forms. I think that one easy example would be how corporations have tied consumerism to virtue signaling. I feel it when I wear certain pants or something, but I was thinking of like Tom's shoes with the whole 1-for-1 shoe thing, and they tie this moral concept to consumption, and then it's internalized in us, and we all feel these social pressures to buy certain things, certain brands. And that's kind of an invisible force. It can also be something that is viewed as unpatriotic towards the state, defining what is unpatriotic during times of war. Propaganda, I think it kind of, it really constructs truth and reality. And it's dangerous because it's dictating what is valid as truth before you can even enter the conversation. And yes, there's always somebody behind the curtain pulling the strings, and that is usually for profit.
I like all of what you said, especially like the sort of, it's almost like trying to describe a ghost you can't see, but you can feel. Like you're getting to this like specter-like quality of propaganda and how it gets inside you, especially like the philosophical angle in that way. There's I think Louis Althusser is a philosopher. He actually strangled his wife, which is totally random and not related to this at all. But sometimes random philosophers are violent psychopaths, but they also write brilliant philosophy or whatever. But he wrote philosophy about like state ideology, about how nation state ideology gets in your head and everything. And it's like, yeah, like you're saying, it's like inescapable. Like it's in you and it motivates your actions in ways that you aren't even aware of, unless you like make really, really difficult conscious efforts to become aware of it. But like your purchase choices, where you hang out, what media you consume, what products you buy, all of it. But yeah, it's in you. It makes your psychology in a large way. This idea that like we aren't even fully ourselves. We already came with some propaganda in us. Like that's kind of scary.
Yeah. And like you're saying, I think that's like when it's most powerful, when we're making these choices deliberately or without any persuasion, but that isn't the case.
Yes.
People are inundated with whatever narrative the second that they go online or the second that they turn on the TV. Like, I think it's so pervasive that most of the people, what is it? You know, when you walk into a room and that room like has some really strange odor to it and it's like assaulting you and it's terrible and you're like, what the fuck is this? But you have to stay in that room for some
Who
reason.
fucking
And a half
farted?
hour later, yeah. But like a half hour later, like you don't notice
Yeah.
it at all. Like it could still be there, but your brain kind of turns off the notification that like this, oh, you're clearly not leaving. So I'm just going to not tell you about this anymore. I feel like it's almost the same thing. Like people are so used to being propagandized that they don't even recognize it as strange or weird that this narrative is being pushed to them for some reason, right? It's just that's life. That's how it is, right?
I love that analogy. I oftentimes come home from vacation and I enter the threshold of my door and I try to smell like, does my house have a stink to it that I'm just not smelling because I'm used to it and I've acclimated. And I think, yeah, people have acclimated to the smell of propaganda.
Absolutely. It really is like a super apt metaphor for real. Like yeah. There's like, have you heard the "this is water" thing? The commencement. I mean, maybe it's because I studied him a little bit in grad school, but the writer David Foster Wallace gave this commencement speech at Kenyon College in 2000 something, 2005, 2006. But his whole spiel was like this parable about these fish. These two little fish are just swimming along, and then some older fish swims the opposite direction. He's like, "Hey boys, how's the water?" And they sort of stop and look at each other and are like, "What the hell is water?" And this idea that like if you live in it, you don't notice it anymore. Like you need some wise old sage to point it out to you because we don't know to look for it because we live in it every day. Like what you're saying.
That is 100% it.
And leading back,
What's our water? Our water.
yeah, leading
Sorry, go
back
ahead.
to like the democracy, it's like, who are you voting for? The question is like, it's already in your head that there's two choices and there's only two.
Yeah, the most genius system of control ever devised. That's what Howard Zinn said. He might be onto something.
So I guess when I think about propaganda, my brain immediately goes to national defense and like World War II, like literally that Uncle Sam poster, want you, like that is what pops into my head when I think propaganda. And I think that probably shapes why I'm most interested in or what I most focus on is really that wartime or propaganda that you probably heard the term like disinformation or misinformation, right? These are all kind of parts or subcategories of propaganda, if you want to call it that. There's a lot of academics on what is misinformation, and there's a lot of back and forth on like, and I'm just going to go through real quick, like kind of what these definitions are. But propaganda, I think you guys hit it with trying to influence through narratives. It's really focused on getting an emotional response from somebody. It doesn't mean it's necessarily false though, right? Like you can have 100% true propaganda, kind of Joe, like what you said with what we're doing here. We have a narrative, we have a thing that we're trying to get across, but we're trying to do it in an honest and open way, right? But acknowledging, yeah, we have a narrative, right? We are spreading propaganda to the best of our ability. But then when you get into things like disinformation, that's got a very different connotation to it. That's much more national security feel to it. It feels more sinister, I think. Like propaganda can feel sinister, but disinformation itself is explicitly false information that's being spread in order to drive a narrative, right? Like this is not real information. Sometimes there's a kernel of truth there, but the parts that are actually emphasized are not necessarily that kernel of truth, but that's used to kind of as a argument device, basically, so they can always point back to, hey, there's this
Like a
like kernel of truth
cudgel or a hammer or something.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Like they're like if you question this, that doesn't matter because oh, well, what about this part, right? And then it's just going straight back to the actual information that they're trying to push, right? And then when you talk misinformation, like this, honestly, throughout the show, we're probably not going to say misinformation very much because I don't even think academically they can agree on what misinformation is. It goes back and forth between, oh, when someone says disinformation or spreads disinformation, that first person who did it intentionally, it's disinformation. But when I spread it, if I don't know it's disinformation, now it's misinformation. And I think that's bullshit because because it's all about like where did it originate? What was the original intent of this information that's being spread, right? That's kind of how I think about it, right? If it came from a disinformation campaign originally, it's still disinformation whether you know it or not when you're spreading it is kind of how I feel about that. But that's really the area that I'm interested in, like how are nation states trying to influence other nation states with or without their knowledge? I hope, if people listen to this podcast, that one thing that they can come away with is an understanding that every time you go online, you are being targeted by foreign countries with narratives that they want to spread in our country. It doesn't matter what you do online unless you basically go to like your email and send it and don't read any of the spam you get. You're going to get advertisements or you're going to get things in your algorithm that are being pushed by other countries. And as an example of this, right? Like we'll definitely talk about this a lot more through some of our episodes, but I want to just bring up one specific case study. So the case study I'm going to talk about real quickly is around tenant media. So in September of 2024, the Justice Department, the U.S. Justice Department, actually unsealed an indictment revealing that a Russian state-controlled media company, which is Russia Today, actually covertly funneled around $10 million into Tenet Media, which was a Tennessee-based content creation company. And what they did with this was they basically aimed to disseminate content that was from Russia Today into American influencers, their actual content that they're pushing out to other people. So one of the things they did was they recruited prominent right-wing influencers like Tim Pool, Dave Rubin, and Betty Johnson to produce videos and podcasts that promoted pro-Russian narratives. The influencers themselves, basically said they had no idea where this money was coming from, but in some instances were getting paid like $400,000 a month, as much as $400,000 a month, and just no question as to like where this is actually coming from, apparently. So that's why like I said earlier, I think misinformation's bullshit because even if these people like didn't know, right, what this was being pushed, yeah, the impact is clear. Anyway, so just to kind of close out on this little example here, they were trying to conceal the funding. The Russia Today operatives basically created a fictitious persona of a wealthy European sponsor, Eduardo Gregorian, basically trying to mask the origins of where the funds were coming from. And this is just another example of how far other countries are willing to go to influence the American public. And like I mentioned, we'll talk more about Russia. We'll go way back and we'll talk about their operations that they've done in Georgia and Romania and all these other Eastern European countries that mimic this specific case study that occurred in the United States, right? So that's really kind of where my main focus is, what I'm really interested in talking about, exploring. I'm also very interested in learning about the propaganda around capitalism, the systems we have in the United States, and our political systems, right? Because I feel like we are in a precarious spot because of the political systems that we have in the United States and the way that they've tried to control the direction that we go. So I'm very interested in learning about that. But
I like that if you go online, it's happening. You're consuming it. It's not like, oh no, am I in propaganda now? Am I not in propaganda? No, you're in it. If you go online, you're in it. And like you're saying, that other countries' governments and corporations all over the world even want to influence, specifically the American population, because our political system has so much power and influence over the rest of the world. Like it's an incredibly useful population to manipulate. If you're going to manipulate a population on Earth, which one's the most useful to manipulate? Probably us. But yeah, it's like I guess my point was that whatever we do in other countries, we can probably assume other countries are trying to do to us as well. And so I was just thinking about during COVID in the Philippines. I remember hearing about this story, and like the Chinese had developed a vaccine I guess a vaccine for COVID, and they were trying to ship it to the Philippines and stuff. But the U.S. Department of Defense had like a Facebook influence campaign in the Philippines, and they were like spreading disinformation about China's COVID vaccine to get people not to use it, to sort of drag China's name. And some reporter asked a DOD person, like, like people may have died because they didn't get the vaccine because you made them doubt it or whatever, are you guys thinking about that or whatever? And the spokesperson was just like, we weren't really, it wasn't a public health thing. We were just trying to drag China's name through the mud. Like they're just really concerned with the story, right? And like, we're not the only sinister government on earth. Other governments are doing that, but it's just like it's a wake-up call, because it's like if we're doing it to other people, people are definitely doing it to us. And it's like there are just so many sinister influences to worry about these days.
You said something there that I think is super important, which is we're a ripe population for targeting for this type of thing because we've been conditioned to ignore it. Also, probably the majority of Americans would think this. We haven't lived in a extremely authoritarian government the way that others have, that might make them more cautious about the messages that their government is pushing, right? I think, like, does that make sense what I'm
Like
saying?
having
Like,
in-your-face
I feel like,
dictator, yeah, it's sort of more
yeah,
subtle in our system until now, I
right,
guess.
exactly. Like, right. Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, like, that's the thing, right? If you live in Eastern Europe and Russia's on your doorstep, like, that they're pushing narratives, right? Like that's something that they actually teach in schools in places like Finland. We don't do any of that here. We don't even have like good government programs right now or government agencies that are responsible for identifying and notifying people of these things because they've been shut down by the current administration, like the ones that did exist. Like, so we are ripe for this type of influence campaign for sure.
Yeah, just find a population who's on their cell phones all the time and doesn't have a Department of Education.
Oh man.
What are we to do, this heavily overworked, propagandized population with all these competing narratives in our face every day? What are we to do?
Come together.
The beauty of it, though, is like once you see this and see the mechanics behind it, you can't unsee it. And that gives you power because you can engage with it and you can have power over it because it no longer has power over you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's part of the, stay woke. It's like literally like pay attention to what's going on. Pay attention to how you're being influenced. That's how you stay woke. And then what you can do about it is like Arthur's saying, what we're doing about it too. Like we're learning things and then we're turning around and sharing what we're learning with people. Right. And the more people that turn around and share what they learn about this, the more that spreads. And then our propaganda is doing its magic and out there, Our propaganda is wake up and look at it. Notice how it's happening.
Exactly.
Teach other people
Like,
about it.
I think it's not going away. It's only going to get more complicated. It's only going to get more advanced, right? It's something that we just need to understand is going to be in our lives forever. And we, like you said, yeah, awareness is the best defense in this scenario.
It's been really nice too, just as like an aside, talking about it out loud. It's really great for mental health, I think, engaging in these conversations, realizing that your reality
Not
is
insane.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Exactamundo.
You can't overstate that enough. It really is valuable having like commiseration is worth its weight in gold. Like just being able to, oh man, this sucks. Can we talk about it? Like this just sucks.